Ashera knelt on the cold metal floor, her silver fur matted with dirt and dried blood. The chains around her wrists and ankles clanked with every small movement, a cruel reminder that she was nothing more than property. For years, she had been the personal slave of Overlord Xerath, the ruthless leader of the Zontrax Dominion. He was a towering reptilian, his emerald-green scales gleaming under the dim lights of his throne room. His kind saw themselves as superior, believing that weaker species were meant to serve. And to Xerath, Ashera was nothing more than a prized possession, something to control, to break, to own. She had stopped dreaming of freedom long ago. Hope was a dangerous thing for a slave. It only made the pain worse. But everything changed the night the humans arrived. The alarm blared through the Zontrax fortress, red warning lights flashing across the walls. Ashera looked up, her ears twitching at the sound of gunfire in the distance. The guards rushed through the halls, shouting in their guttural language. Something was happening, something big. She had seen attacks before, but this was different. The sounds were getting closer. Then, the door to her chamber burst open. A tall figure in black combat armor stepped inside, a rifle in his hands. His helmet retracted, revealing a strong-jawed face with piercing blue eyes. Captain Darius Voss of the Terran Liberation Corps. She had never seen a human before, not up close. There was something fierce in his expression, but his eyes weren't like Xerath's. They weren't filled with cruelty. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ashera, chained and weak, expected the worst. Another master, another ruler. But then, Darius shot the chains holding her to the floor. "You're free," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "If you want to live, come with me." Freedom. The word sounded unreal. She didn't move at first. It had to be a trick, a cruel joke. But when he held out his hand, she realized something. This human meant it. He wasn't here to claim her. He was here to save her. She grabbed his hand. Darius pulled her to her feet just as more Zontrax warriors stormed into the room. "Move," he shouted, pushing her behind cover. Blaster fire erupted, the air burning hot with energy bolts. The human soldiers fought with ruthless precision, cutting down the Zontrax guards with well-placed shots. Ashera had seen battles before, but humans, they fought differently. They fought to win. Adrenaline surged through her veins. She wasn't just some helpless captive. She had claws. She had speed. And now she had a reason to fight. One of the guards lunged at her, trying to grab her by the throat. Bad idea. Ashera twisted, her claws flashing as she raked them across the Zontrax's face. He screeched in agony, clutching at his ruined eyes before Darius finished him off with a single shot. "Not bad," Darius smirked. "Think you can keep up?" Ashera bared her fangs in something almost like a smile. "Try me." Together, they cut their way through the fortress. Explosions rocked the walls as the human strike team planted charges, ensuring the Zontrax wouldn't recover from this attack. By the time they reached the extraction point, the fortress was already burning. As the dropship lifted off, Ashera looked down at the crumbling prison she had been trapped in for so long. She was never going back. For the first time in her life, she was free. The dropship raced through the dark void of space, leaving the burning Zontrax fortress behind. Inside, Ashera sat against the metal wall, her silver fur still stained with blood. Some of it hers, most of it not. Her violet eyes flickered to Captain Darius Voss, who stood near the cockpit, giving orders to his crew. "Get us back to the TSC Aegis at full speed," Darius commanded. "Zontrax reinforcements won't be far behind." Ashera's ears twitched. Reinforcements. Of course. The Zontrax never let anyone escape, especially not a slave. Her hands curled into fists. No, she wasn't a slave anymore. She had fought. She had killed. She had survived. But what now? Darius turned to her. "How's your shoulder?" She glanced at the burn where a blaster bolt had grazed her. It stung, but she had endured far worse. "I'll live." Darius smirked. "That's the spirit." Before Ashera could respond, alarms blared across the dropship. The pilot's voice crackled over the speakers. "Captain, we got company." Darius rushed to the cockpit. Ashera followed, her heart pounding. Through the windshield, she saw two Zontrax warships closing in. Their spiked hulls glowed with weapon systems charging up. "They're locking on," the co-pilot shouted. "Evasive maneuvers. Fire countermeasures." Darius barked. The ship jolted violently as missiles shot past, barely missing. A deep growl built in Ashera's throat. She knew the Zontrax too well. They wouldn't just destroy the ship, they would board it. They wanted her back. "Brace for impact," the pilot yelled. A shockwave rocked the dropship as a grappling harpoon from one of the warships latched onto them. Metal groaned as the ship was yanked toward the enemy vessel. Darius cursed. "They're pulling us in." "They won't take me," Ashera growled, her claws extending. "I won't go back." Darius gave her a sharp look. "Then let's make sure they don't." He grabbed a rifle and tossed her a blaster. "You know how to use one of these." Ashera weighed the weapon in her hand. It felt strange, heavy, unnatural. But she had watched her captors use them for years. She nodded. "Point and shoot." Darius grinned. "That's the idea." The ship shuddered as the docking clamps locked in. Red emergency lights flashed. They were coming. A loud hiss filled the air as the airlock doors burst open. A flood of Zontrax warriors stormed in, their green-scaled bodies covered in heavy armor. The first one raised his rifle. Ashera moved first. Her instincts took over. She ducked low, fired 2 quick shots, and the first warrior dropped. The others charged, but Darius was already there, cutting them down with precise bursts of plasma fire. The battle was chaos. Energy bolts flew past, sparks rained from the ceiling, and bodies fell. Ashera fought like a storm, dodging, striking, shooting. Every movement felt right, like she had been born for this. Then, a heavy fist slammed into her gut. Ashera gasped as a massive Zontrax warrior grabbed her by the throat, lifting her off the ground. "Weak little pet," he sneered. "You belong to us." She bared her fangs. "Not anymore." With a swift motion, she jammed her claws into his throat. Blood sprayed, and the warrior collapsed, choking. Darius saw it happen and grinned. "You really don't hold back." Ashera wiped her claws clean. Neither do they. The last few enemies fell, and the ship lurched as it finally broke free from the enemy's grip. The pilot shouted, "We're clear," jumping to hyperspace. As the stars stretched into infinity, Ashera let out a slow breath. She was still alive. And for the first time, she had fought for her own freedom. The TSC Aegis, a massive Terran warship, floated in the darkness of space, its hull gleaming under distant starlight. Inside, Ashera sat on the edge of a soft bed, staring at her reflection in the small mirror across the room. It felt strange, too quiet, too clean. For years, she had slept on cold metal floors. Now, she had a room, a bed, freedom. But what was she supposed to do with it? Her silver fur was still streaked with dried blood from the battle. The blaster wound on her shoulder throbbed, but that wasn't what troubled her. It was the silence. She wasn't used to it. No orders, no threats, no one watching her every move. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. The door slid open, and Captain Darius Voss stepped inside. He had removed his armor, now wearing a dark military shirt and pants. Without the battle gear, he looked different. Less like a soldier, more like a man who had seen too much war. "You're supposed to rest," he said, nodding toward the bed. Ashera flicked her ears. "I don't know how." Darius leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Yeah, I figured. After what you've been through, just sitting still must feel weird." She looked away. "Weird? That's one word for it. A long silence stretched between them. Ashera didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to talking like this, like she had a choice. For so long, she had only spoken when spoken to. But Darius, he didn't treat her like she was broken. He didn't look at her with pity. Finally, he spoke again. "You're not a prisoner here, Ashera. You don't owe me anything. You're free." Free. That word again. She let out a bitter chuckle. "And what does a free slave do?" Darius exhaled. He didn't answer right away, as if he understood the weight of her question. Then he said, "Whatever the hell she wants." Ashera stared at him. Could it really be that simple? Before she could respond, an alarm blared through the ship's intercom. A voice crackled over the speakers. "Captain Voss, report to the bridge immediately." Darius straightened. "Stay here. I'll check it out." But Ashera was already on her feet. "I'm coming with you." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right. Let's go." The bridge was alive with activity when they arrived. Officers worked at their stations, screens flashing with incoming transmissions. Commander Vela Quinn, a tall woman with short black hair and sharp blue eyes, turned as Darius entered. "We've intercepted a transmission," she said, her voice tense. "It's a message from Overlord Xerath." Ashera's blood ran cold at the name. The main screen flickered, and there he was, the monster who had kept her in chains for years. Overlord Xerath sneered, his emerald-green scales shining under the dim lights of his throne room. His golden eyes burned with fury. "Terran scum," he hissed. "You have stolen what belongs to me." Darius clenched his fists. "She's not yours, you bastard." Xerath bared his fangs. "I disagree, and so does the bounty I've placed on her head." Ashera's ears flattened. "Bounty?" Xerath continued, his voice dripping with malice. "Every mercenary, slaver, and bounty hunter in the galaxy will be looking for her. There is no escape." His slit pupil eyes locked onto Ashera. "You will come back to me, one way or another." The transmission cut off. The bridge fell silent. Darius turned to Ashera. "He's bluffing." She shook her head. "No, he isn't." The reality sank in. She wasn't free. Not yet. Xerath would never stop hunting her. But she was done running. The bridge remained silent long after the transmission ended. The image of Overlord Xerath's sneering face lingered in Ashera's mind, but she refused to let fear take hold. She had been afraid for too long. Now she was angry. Darius clenched his jaw, his blue eyes dark with frustration. "We need to move. If Xerath put a bounty on you, the entire underworld is going to come crawling out of their holes." Commander Vela Quinn crossed her arms. "We could go dark. Slip into deep space until the heat dies down." Ashera shook her head. "It won't die down. Not with Xerath. He won't stop until he gets what he wants." Vela sighed. "She's right. The Xantrax don't forgive or forget." Darius exhaled sharply. "Then we don't hide. We fight." Ashera blinked. "You would fight for me." Darius gave her a firm look. "I didn't break you out of that hell, just to hand you over to some reptilian tyrant." A warmth spread through Ashera's chest. Something unfamiliar, something she didn't fully understand. No one had ever fought for her before. Before she could respond, the ship's warning alarms blared. The pilot's voice crackled over the speakers. "Captain, we've got incoming ships. 5 unidentified vessels just dropped out of hyperspace." Darius and Vela exchanged a look. "That was fast," Vela muttered. Darius turned to Ashera. "Stay on the bridge. I'll handle this." Ashera bared her fangs. "Not a chance." Darius smirked. "Didn't think you'd listen." They rushed down the hallways as the ship trembled under enemy fire. The TSC Aegis was strong, but it was a warship, not built for running. The enemy wasn't wasting time. They weren't trying to capture. They were trying to disable. By the time they reached the armory, the ship shook again, harder this time. A boarding pod had lashed onto the hull. Darius grabbed a rifle and tossed one to Ashera. "You ready?" She tested the weight of the weapon, then flexed her claws. "I was born ready." The airlock doors burst open with an explosion, sending smoke and debris flying. Through the haze, dark figures stormed in, mercenaries in mismatched armor, their weapons raised. Darius and Ashera moved as one. Blaster fire erupted. Ashera ducked low, firing precise shots, while Darius took down targets with practiced efficiency. The mercenaries were skilled, but they weren't Xantrax soldiers. They weren't ready for a warrior who had spent her whole life fighting to survive. One bounty hunter lunged at Ashera with an electrified blade. She sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and snapped it before slamming him into the wall. Another merc charge, but a single shot from Darius took him down. More enemies poured in. It was a brutal, relentless fight. Smoke filled the air. Sparks rained from broken panels. Bodies hit the floor. Then, a massive figure stepped through the wreckage. He was nearly 7 feet tall, his armor thick, his helmet adorned with blood-red markings. His voice was like gravel. "Ashera," he rumbled, "the Overlord wants you alive." She snarled. Then he should have come himself. The bounty hunter lunged. She didn't run. Ducking under his swing, she drove her claws into the gaps in his armor. He roared in pain but swung again, knocking her backward. Darius fired a shot, direct to the head. The bounty hunter collapsed. Ashera panted, adrenaline still surging. She turned to Darius. He was bleeding, a deep gash on his arm, but his smirk remained. "That all you got?" He taunted the remaining mercenaries. They hesitated. Then, as sirens blared, they retreated. The fight was over. But Ashera knew the war had just begun. Smoke still hung in the corridors of the TSC Aegis, the scent of burned metal and plasma fire lingering in the air. Bodies of fallen mercenaries lay scattered across the deck. Ashera's heart pounded, her silver fur matted with sweat and blood. She wiped her claws on a torn piece of fabric from one of the fallen enemies. Darius leaned against the wall, clutching his wounded arm. His breath was heavy, but his blue eyes were sharp. He gave her a tired grin. "Well, that was fun." Ashera snorted. "You humans have a strange idea of fun." Vela's voice crackled over the intercom. "Captain, report to the bridge." Now, Darius pushed off the wall. "That doesn't sound good." They hurried back to the bridge. The crew was tense, their faces lit by the glow of holoscreens displaying enemy movement. More ships were coming. Dozens. Vela met them at the command station. "That bounty spread fast. Every cutthroat in the galaxy is tracking us." Darius clenched his jaw. "We can't fight an entire fleet." "We won't get the chance," Vela said. "They're blocking every hyperspace lane. They're hurting us." Ashera's claws dug into her palms. Hurting. Like an animal being forced into a trap. She had lived in a cage for years. She wasn't about to be captured again. Darius turned to her. "Any idea where they'd take you if they caught you?" Ashera's ears flicked. "Xareth wouldn't risk transporting me to his homeworld. Too many eyes. He'd take me somewhere lawless, somewhere no one would question a missing slave." Vela's fingers danced across the control panel. "That narrows it down to about 50 outlaw-controlled systems." Ashera's expression hardened. "One stands out. Vorax Maw." The name sent a ripple of unease through the crew. Vorax Maw was an infamous pirate stronghold, a place where laws meant nothing and the powerful crushed the weak. Darius let out a slow breath. "Then that's where we set the trap." Vela blinked. "You want to go there? Are you insane?" Darius smirked. "Probably. But if Xareth's goons expect to take her there, we'll hit them first." Ashera crossed her arms. "You're risking a lot for me." Darius met her gaze. "I don't abandon people. Not my crew. Not you." Something flickered in her chest, an unfamiliar warmth. She had spent her life being nothing but a possession. But to Darius, she was someone worth fighting for. The plan took shape quickly. The Aegis would pretend to be crippled, luring the bounty hunters in. Once close enough, they would turn the tables, hitting hard and escaping before reinforcements could arrive. Hours later, as the Aegis approached Vorax Maw, Ashera stood next to Darius on the bridge. The planet below was a swirling mass of storms and ruined cities, a place where survival depended on strength. The first wave of hunters arrived, their ships locking onto the Aegis like hungry vultures. Darius smirked. All right, let's give them a reason to regret this. Engines roared. Weapons powered up. The ship trembled as the battle began. Ashera tightened her grip on her blaster. She had spent years waiting for freedom. Now she would fight for it. The TSC Aegis drifted through the stormy void above Vorax Maw, its engines flickering as if damaged. To any watching bounty hunter, the ship looked like an easy target, a wounded animal waiting to be claimed. But inside, the crew was ready. Ashera stood beside Darius Voss on the bridge, her silver fur bristling with anticipation. The tension in the air was thick. This was her fight now. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running. She was about to strike back. Vela's voice cut through the silence. Multiple ships incoming. Looks like they took the bait. On the holoscreen, 10 bounty hunter vessels closed in. Their weapons were primed, their intent clear. They wanted the bounty. They wanted her. Darius smirked. Let's welcome them properly. The moment the first ship latched onto the Aegis, the trap was sprung. The damaged systems roared to life, and the warship spun with deadly precision. Cannons fired, tearing through the enemy formation before they could react. Ashera felt the ship shake as the boarding alarms blared. They're coming in. Darius grabbed his rifle. Then we hold the line. Together, they sprinted down the corridors as mercenaries breached the lower decks. The first wave of hunters stormed in. Grizzled men and alien warriors, weapons blazing. Ashera didn't hesitate. She was done being prey. She moved like a shadow, dodging plasma bolts and striking with lethal precision. Her claws found weak points in armor, her blaster never missing a shot. The mercenaries weren't ready for a fighter like her. Darius fought beside her, his movements just as ruthless. Every shot he fired was calculated, every step precise. They were outnumbered, but they fought as one. A massive Tracarian warlord charged at Ashera, swinging a brutal shock axe. She ducked, spun, and plunged her claws into his throat. He collapsed with a gurgling roar. Darius let out a low whistle. Remind me never to piss you off. Ashera smirked. Too late. The battle raged on. The corridors of the Aegis became a battlefield of smoke, fire, and death. The mercenaries were relentless, but they hadn't expected a fight like this. Then, a new sound. A deep, heavy thud echoed through the halls. The ground shook. Darius tensed. That's not a normal bounty hunter. From the smoke, a towering armored figure emerged. A Zontrax elite. Kareth's personal hunter. The warrior's emerald green armor gleamed, his reptilian eyes cold and merciless. He carried a shock spear, crackling with deadly energy. He didn't speak. He charged. Ashera barely dodged the first strike. The spear slammed into the wall, leaving a smoking crater where she had stood a second ago. Darius fired a shot. The Zontrax deflected it with ease. Ashera lunged, aiming for the gaps in his armor. But he was faster than he looked. He caught her wrist and slammed her into the ground. Pain exploded through her body. Darius roared in fury and attacked, but the elite was too strong. He grabbed Darius by the throat and lifted him off the ground. Ashera's vision blurred. No, she had been a slave for years. She had been weak. But now, she was free. And she would never let anyone take that away. With a furious snarl, she lunged at the Zontrax's exposed neck, her claws sinking deep. The warrior stiffened. His grip on Darius loosened. With a final, brutal twist, Ashera ripped his throat out. The elite fell. Ashera panted, blood dripping from her claws. Darius coughed and looked at her, eyes wide. Remind me to never, ever underestimate you. She helped him up. Let's finish this. The battle wasn't over yet, but the hunters had made a mistake. They came thinking she was prey. Now, they knew the truth. She was a warrior. The TSC Aegis trembled from the final explosions of the battle. Smoke curled through the corridors, the scent of burnt wiring and blood filling the air. Ashera wiped the sweat from her brow, her silver fur damp from the fight. Around her, fallen mercenaries lay motionless, the remnants of Sareth's failed ambush. Darius steadied himself against the wall, his chest rising and falling heavily. His blue eyes flicked to Ashera, his lips curving into a tired grin. I don't know about you, but I'm getting real tired of these guys dropping in uninvited. Ashera smirked, flexing her claws. Then let's make sure they stop. Vela's voice crackled over the intercom. Captain, we have a problem. Darius and Ashera exchanged a look before sprinting toward the bridge. When they arrived, Vela was at the command console, tension evident in her sharp green eyes. The holoscreen flashed red, displaying a new fleet inbound. This isn't just another wave of bounty hunters, Vela said. It's a Xantrax war frigate. Sareth isn't playing games anymore. Ashera's ears flattened. He's coming himself. Darius clenched his jaw. Then we need to leave. Now. Vela's fingers danced over the controls. Easier said than done. The hyperspace lanes are still blocked, and Vorex Maw's gravity field is messing with our navigation. We're boxed in. Ashera's tail flicked with frustration. Zareth was smarter than she had hoped. He knew they would fight off the bounty hunters, but he had made sure there was no escape. The ship suddenly rocked, a direct hit sending a violent shudder through the hull. Vela cursed. The frigate is opening fire. Darius spun to the pilot. Give me options. The pilot, a wiry man named Rogan, wiped sweat from his forehead. Only one, Captain. We go down. Ashera's eyes widened. You mean land on Vorex Maw? Rogan shrugged. More like crash. Darius ran a hand through his dark hair. Great, because nothing says good plan like dropping into a pirate-infested wasteland. Another explosion rocked the ship. The Xantrax frigate was gaining on them, its cannons tearing through their defenses. There was no time left. Darius made the call. Take us down. Full speed. The Aegis dove toward the planet, its engines roaring as they punched through Vorex's thick atmosphere. The hull heated up, metal groaning under the strain. The city lights of the lawless world came into view, a massive sprawl of neon and ruin, crawling with criminals. The Xantrax weren't far behind. Brace for impact, Rogan shouted. The ship crashed through a steel tower, debris flying as it skidded across a landing zone, crushing abandoned vehicles. Sparks flew, metal screeched, and finally, the Aegis came to a violent stop. Smoke filled the air, alarms blared, but they were alive. Darius groaned. Remind me never to do that again. Vela coughed. We won't get the chance. The Xantrax will be here any minute. Ashera's golden eyes flickered with determination. No more running. She looked at Darius. We make our stand here. Darius met her gaze, then nodded. Then let's give them a fight they'll never forget. Outside, the war horns of the Xantrax echoed through the ruined city. The real battle was about to begin. The air on Vorex Maw was thick with smoke and the hum of distant sirens. The Aegis lay wrecked behind them, sparks flickering from its damaged hull. Ashera crouched beside Darius, her ears twitching at the sound of marching boots. The Xantrax forces were closing in. Darius reloaded his rifle, his sharp blue eyes scanning the ruins. We're outnumbered, outgunned. Vela, kneeling behind a broken metal barrier, checked the holomap. They're blocking every exit. No easy way out. Ashera flexed her claws. Then we make our own way. From the fog of the ruined city, shadows moved. The Zantrax warriors, tall, armored figures with glowing visors, fanned out in formation. Their leader stepped forward. Xareth. His black and emerald warplate gleamed under the neon lights of the crumbling city. His reptilian face was twisted in a smirk, his piercing yellow eyes locked onto Ashera. "I warned you, little pet," Xareth said, his voice cold. "You could have lived comfortably as mine. Instead, you chose to run." Ashera's fur bristled, her golden eyes narrowing. "I chose to be free." Xareth chuckled. "Freedom." He gestured to the wreckage, to the warriors surrounding them. "Does this look like freedom?" Darius stepped forward, his gun raised. "You talk too much." Xareth's smile vanished. With inhuman speed, he lunged forward, his energy blade igniting mid-swing. Darius barely dodged, rolling aside as the blade sliced through steel like paper. Ashera moved in, claws flashing. Their battle had begun. The streets erupted into chaos. Blaster fire lit up the night, explosions shook the ground, and screams echoed through the ruins. The Aegis crew fought with everything they had, but the Zantrax were relentless. Vila and Rogan took cover behind debris, exchanging fire with advancing soldiers. Darius fought with ruthless efficiency, dodging and counterattacking with deadly precision. But Xareth was a monster. His strength was unnatural, his movements too fast, too precise. His blade clashed against Ashera's claws, sending sparks flying. "You are nothing without me," Xareth growled, pushing her back. "Just a weak little slave pretending to be strong." Ashera gritted her teeth, forcing herself to stand. No, not anymore. She dodged his next strike, twisting behind him and raking her claws across his side. His armor cracked, and he snarled in pain. Darius saw his opening. He fired a direct shot to Xareth's knee, making the warlord stumble. Ashera didn't hesitate. She lunged, grabbing Xareth's blade arm and twisting with all her strength. The sickening snap of bone filled the air. Xareth roared in agony, falling to his knees. Blood dripped from his mouth, his rage turning to something else. Fear. Ashera stood over him, her chest rising and falling. "You don't own me," she said softly, her claws glistening with his blood. For the first time, Xareth looked powerless, defeated. Darius stepped beside her. "End this." She drove her claws through his throat. Xareth gurgled, twitched, then went still. Silence fell over the battlefield. The remaining Zantrax warriors hesitated. Their leader was dead. Without Xareth's command, they had no reason to fight. One by one, they retreated into the darkness. Vila exhaled, slumping against the rubble. "Is it over?" Darius looked at Ashera. She wiped her claws, her golden eyes still burning with adrenaline. It is now. For the first time in her life, she was truly free. The battle was over. The fires in the ruined streets of Vorax Moss still smoldered, casting flickering shadows over the wreckage. Xareth was dead, and his forces had retreated. For the first time in her life, Ashera felt something she had never truly known before. Peace. She stood among the rubble, her silver fur streaked with dirt and dried blood. The night air was thick with the scent of smoke and metal, but it no longer smelled like a prison. It smelled like a new beginning. Darius leaned against a half-destroyed cargo crate, breathing heavily. His dark hair was damp with sweat, his blue eyes filled with exhaustion, but also relief. "Well," he muttered, wiping his rifle, "that was one hell of a fight." Vela let out a low whistle as she looked around at the aftermath. "You think the bounty on us just doubled?" Rogan chuckled, even as he clutched his injured arm. "Maybe tripled." Ashera smirked. "Let them come." Darius turned to her, his expression softening. "You're free now," he said quietly. "No more running. No more hiding." She met his gaze, and for the first time in years, she truly believed those words. No more chains, no more masters. But then she glanced back at the wreck of the Aegis. Their ship, their home, was destroyed. Vela sighed. So, what now? For the first time, Ashera had a choice. No orders to follow, no master to obey. The galaxy was open to her. She turned to Darius, tilting her head. Where do you go when you have nowhere left to run? Darius chuckled. You find somewhere worth staying. The words settled deep inside her. She had spent her whole life trying to escape, trying to survive. But now she could build something new. A faint hum filled the air. In the distance, a ship descended from the clouds, its sleek metal reflecting the neon glow of Vorek's skyline. Vela squinted. That's not a bounty hunter. Darius smirked. No, that's an old friend. The ship landed, dust swirling beneath it. The loading ramp lowered, revealing a tall, broad-shouldered man with dark bronze skin and piercing gray eyes. His name was Orin Kale, an ex-smuggler and an ally from Darius's past. Orin grinned. Heard you idiots got yourselves in trouble again. Darius gestured to the ruins. Just a little. Orin looked Ashera up and down, then nodded. So, you're the one Xareth was after. Ashera met his gaze. Not anymore. Orin smirked. Good answer. He glanced at Darius. I assume you'll need a lift. Darius glanced at Ashera. Up to you. The old Ashera, the slave, the fugitive, might have hesitated, might have been afraid of making the wrong choice. But she wasn't that person anymore. She looked at the stars above, then at Darius, Vela, and the others. Her new family. With a small smile, she nodded. Let's go. Together, they stepped onto the ship. The ramp lifted, the engines roared to life, and they soared into the endless sky. Ashera didn't know what lay ahead. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid. For the first time, she was free to live.